Okay, welcome everyone to the June 23rd Select Board meeting. It is 6:32. I am in Tracy Hall to meet obligations of the open meeting law because the emergency order has been lifted, and other members of the board, Claudette Brochu, Rob Gear, Marsha Calloway, and Mary Layton are joining us remotely. Herb Durfee, our time manager, is with me, and Miranda Bergmeyer, his assistant is, the town manager's assistant is with us. CATV is also with us, helping us out with some of this stuff. And so we'll just do our best to sort of run our first hybrid meeting. I confess that I don't know everything that is happening right now, but I've been told that it will happen. I can't see myself anymore, which is new. There I am. Maybe I can pin myself. Yeah, great. Okay, so that being said, let's begin our meeting. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Go ahead, Mary.
I have a question about the agenda.
Okay.
On our motion sheet, item number 11, executive session.
Yes.
The first motion says to invite the town manager to join, and I understand he may need to leave the meeting by 9.
Mhm.
So I think we should, do something about that.
Okay. Yeah, I think what we will have to do is make sure that we're paying close to our
Close attention to the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
In short. So yes, and thank you. And you'll see that there's essentially 2 executive sessions planned for that agenda item, and there's motions that are in the motion sheet to reflect that. Okay.
There are 4 different motions.
Yep, for 2 different sessions.
5 different motions. Okay.
Okay, so that was a question. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Is there a second? Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Marsha. Any further discussion on the approval of the agenda? Okay.
Yeah, how much time should we allow?
4.
We had discussed when I had the question,
Mm-hmm.
if we wanted to invite the town manager to join the executive session, which is the first motion.
Mm-hmm.
When should we, how should we do this? I mean, shall we allow half an hour?
I think that's reasonable. Is there not a notation on the agenda for that? Forgive me if I.
For what? Well, the executive session is near the end of the agenda. It's number 11.
Yeah,
This is 8:55,
So yeah, so I think that the totality of the executive session for the totality for the agenda item is 25 minutes, and there are potentially 2 executive sessions. And so I think we should assume, let's say 10 minutes for the first part of that agenda item. How does that sound?
So we're going to be looking for this perhaps at 8:25.
Yes, and so as you,
Okay.
so just to be clear, we can reorder agenda items by action of the board at any
Right.
time. With
Okay.
okay, so that's why I'm offering the sort of, we'll keep an eye on the time situation.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anyone? Okay, so can we call the question? Okay.
Sure.
All in favor of the approval of the agenda, please raise your hand. Okay, that's great. Okay. Yes, 5-0. Okay, next is public comment. Any public comments for items not on the agenda? And so just as a reminder for folks, let the raise your hand button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then if you're participating by phone, press *9. Okay, Cheryl Lindbergh, would you like to make a public comment?
Hi, Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road, and I am making a comment as the chair of the Board of Listers. And I just wanted to give you a quick update that we were there today. We have issued our grievance letters from the 11 grievances that occurred today, and that we will be lodging the grand list next Wednesday. So it'll be available in time for the board to set a tax rate.
Thank you for that update, Cheryl. It's
Yeah.
appreciated. Okay, and then I see a public comment from Linda Cook. Linda, please press *6 to unmute yourself.
Yes, the question I have is, will you be continuing to do remotely or for the foreseeable future?
The board hasn't had a discussion on that to date. I hope you can appreciate sort of this hybrid model as we transition and respond to the emergency order, but we haven't taken any action on that one way or another.
Great. I think it's a great idea to keep going forward with us being able to be joining you from other residents. But thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate that, Linda. Okay. Any other public comment for items not on the agenda? Okay. Not seeing any. Is there any select board comment? Okay. Go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, I just want to thank John Carroll for all of his work he's done in the past on DRB and other town groups, and hope he enjoys his retirement, his real retirement.
Yes, thank you so much, Claudette. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Okay, any other select board comment? Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Can we, okay, so when we make a motion to approve the consent agenda, we are receiving correspondence, we are approving the AP warrants and any meeting minutes and any corrections that were sent to Miranda. And then if we would like to discuss anything substantially, we pull it, right? So just as a reminder on process. Go ahead, Marcia.
Just a comment that I think Amy Stringer's looking for a response. She sent in 3 things, so I'm not sure if that requires pulling or just a decision that she'll get a response from the board or the chair.
Yeah, so let's pull it to follow process. And which, is there one that you would like to pull in particular?
Well, why don't we pull all 3? I think it's just one of the things that we were mindful of in the beginning when we were talking about correspondence was that people need to have an answer. And so if they're asking specifically for something, I'd like to look at it and have the board decide on who's going to make an answer.
Okay. So can somebody, if there's nothing else to pull, can someone make a motion that includes, someone pull that? Can someone make a motion to approve the consent agenda while pulling that? Does that sound, yeah, I'm getting a nod from Herb.
I'll try it. So I move to approve the consent agenda, but also to pull the Stringer correspondence in full.
Great. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Rob. Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. Okay, so now we can discuss sort of the approval of the consent agenda, if there's any sort of comments on that, and then we'll vote to receive that correspondence. So is there any sort of further comments on the AP warrants or the meeting minutes, for example? Okay, so no discussion. All in favor of approving the consent agenda while pulling, oh, Claudette, did you have something?
Cheryl has her hand up.
Oh, thank you. I'm in a new room, so I'm forgetting. Cheryl, go ahead.
Okay. Just under discussion, before you would do the warrant, Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road, this time as treasurer. I just need to have two things discussed maybe before. One is minor, not an item for discussion. I just wanted you to know that on page 6 of the warrant, the item for the VTGFOA is the Vermont Government Finance Officers Association. The invoice description is citing Lister for that. That is not correct. That's me as treasurer attending our conference and annual membership meeting. I just wanted you to note that. But the item that I am concerned about, there are 1, 2, 3 at least payments that are being made to individuals for officiating, and I would really appreciate understanding why those are not going under payroll. Any stipend, any type of earnings should be going through the payroll process and have in the past. So maybe before you approve it, is there a chance to discuss those or ask the question?
Would board members like to, how about I ask our town manager if he has any insight? And Charles, do you have any other public comments or?
Not, no,
Treasurer
those were,
comment?
yeah, that was just the stuff as the warrant is being ready for approval.
Okay, great. So, and then now I'll turn to Herb as he's looking through his documents if he.
Which you can give me a name to start with.
Yeah, here we go, first moment.
Uh-oh.
Whoa.
So, yeah. So I'm gonna mute myself.
So can you give me a couple quick names that I can look at?
You have to unmute yourself.
Herb, on the third page, there's one
Never mind.
for Jamie Patton Martin. There's
So
one
Herb's
on,
looking, but you can hear him, and there's no reverb.
there's one lower down for Anina Sablin.
I can't hear
And
Cheryl's talking, and I can't hear Cheryl because I've muted
She's
myself.
just citing the names
So
of the
she's
people
citing
in
the
the
names.
AP.
Okay, great.
And on page 4, it's for Riley Lohman. And
Yeah, I'll have to check into those, but they are written as stipends. So if we have to change that to a payroll, we will.
thank you, because as we know, the board gets a stipend, the listers get a stipend, the treasurer get there. It all, to me, falls under that same. And I would urge you to be, have us look at that so we're not violating the regs.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
I just want to make sure we don't have some contract over the top of those.
Can I talk now without reverb testing? Yeah. Okay, cool. So it sounds like Herb's answer was that they're done as stipends and that's why they appear. If they need to be considered payroll, then he will check
And I'll
With-
pull them
He'll
if
check
they
and
have to be
pull.
payroll. Yeah.
and he'll pull them from the warrant.
Yeah.
So that, and it seems like Cheryl's nodding, so she feels comfortable with that clarity as the treasurer. Okay. Now so any other discussion on the approval of the consent agenda with pulling of Amy Stringer's correspondence? Okay, how about we vote on that? All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, excellent. That was 5 unanimous. Okay, now can I get a motion for the correspondence? To receive the correspondence? And we'll discuss it.
I move to receive the correspondence from Amy Stringer and to discuss it.
Is there a second? Okay, great. Made by Mary, seconded by Marcia. Okay, so I'm happy to I'm named very extensively. I'm happy to sort of offer a response now. I'm also happy to, I think I think in terms of process, right? I'm happy to discuss it now if board members would like that to, or I'm happy to also write something and send it to board members for sort of approval to appear in the next packet. Is there a suggestion on process?
Do you want to briefly respond?
Sure. How do other folks feel? So this is just a process question. Yeah, people feel good about that? Marcia, you sort of are lingering. Go ahead.
Well, I just feel perhaps the person who is requesting a response might have a preference. I don't know. But I don't think it would hurt to do it orally, and then
Sure.
if she wants to follow up by letter.
Well,
He's in the meeting.
this is a board, I think it's a board question on process. So it seems like board members would like a response now, and then a potential to have a written follow-up that sort of summarizes what has been expressed. Okay. Sure. So I think the Amy Stringer suggests there was a couple of items. And so I think the response that I am prepared to say is that I reviewed sort of the tape of sort of the moment where I said very strongly that there was a moment where a member of our police department may had misgendered repeatedly in a member of our community. Right, and so misgendered in the sense that they didn't use their chosen pronouns, and they didn't correct them after the fact. So that's what I would say when I'm misgendering. And I had cited that I had heard this from the town manager survey, and then in correspondence with Amy, she had asked me for sort of the citation, and I had provided it to be this survey, and it was not in there as I had represented. I was very surprised that I had actually, had very strongly had made that statement. And so I do believe my own mind that I must have heard that somewhere in my work in this community. However, the citation was inaccurate. And so I offered inaccurate information of something that I had heard. And for that, of course, I am sorry. And it came from a place of wanting to be in sort of solidarity with a member, with folks who have different gender identities in our community, and making sure that they are fairly treated by everyone. And so I had suggested that training could do that. And I could go on to say that this board is aware of sort of fair and impartial policing and Rule 13. And I'm happy to sort of explain sort of the past discussions we've had about fair and impartial policing and Rule 13, because indeed we have voted to enhance these policies locally. And we may want to have training that sort of goes beyond sort of the state model policy. So I see Marcia nodding. Does board members like me to say anything further? Okay.
Yep. Good.
Yeah, great. Well, so thank you, Marcia. You're right. We had an intention to make sure that folks are heard and or that they get responses. And so I'm happy to offer that to the extent practical when we can, when is possible. Okay, so can we vote to receive this correspondence?
Yep.
We voted to receive this correspondence.
Yep. No, we need to vote.
We need to vote, that's right.
Motion has been made.
Yep,
but we haven't
been
voted.
made. We had a discussion, which was my statement. And so now let us vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you for receiving that correspondence. Okay, next is the appointment to the Development Review Board. The board will be asked to make appointment to a 3-year term on the Development Review Board. And I see there are, we have an applicant with us.
We make a motion on that.
Please.
Okay, I move to appoint Linda Gray to the Developmental Review Board for a 3-year term ending April 30th, 2024.
Is there a second?
Second.
Made by Mary, seconded by Rob. For the discussion, let's hear a little bit from Linda Gray. How about that? Linda, why don't you tell us a little bit about your interest in applying for this position?
Hi, thank you very much. So I'll give you my address, 175 Kerwin Hill Road. And the reason I'm applying is that current members of the board contacted me because they have either have several current or coming vacancies. So a couple members of the current board contacted me to encourage me to apply. And so I thought about it a bit and talked to them some and decided, yes, that I could do that. And basically, as I said in the application, this kind of process and deliberations that the DRB makes, I think I'm accurate in feeling that they are pretty similar in general to stuff I'm already used to as an alternate on the District 3 Environmental Commission and as a member, as a JP and a member of the Board of Civil Authority. So I'm kind of used to the process and used to the concept of, applying regulations to particular situations. And so, and the time commitment didn't seem too onerous to me. I'm retired and I am ready to commit to that. So if you, I will serve if appointed.
Because you applied. Any questions for Linda Gray? Go ahead, Claudette, and then Marcia.
Not a question for Linda, but I'm wondering if how many vacancies are there on DRB? Do we know?
Yeah, so I had a memo last packet. So I believe there are 2 current vacancies and then 2 alternates. I'm looking at Miranda to see if she recall off the top of her head, but I believe no worries, Miranda. So I think there's 2 vacancies and 2 alternates. And so if we accept Linda, there 1 vacancy.
Okay, thanks.
To be confirmed, but that is what I think put in a memo last packet. Marcia, did you have a question?
I have a concern. I think that the appearance of conflict of interest here is pretty strong. And particularly, I looked at the Vermont League of Cities and Towns model policy on ethics and conflicts of interest. And this is a quasi-judicial proceeding kind of board where someone is expected to have an independent, impartial opinion. And Linda does, for the last 15 or 20 years, whatever it was, has been on the Energy Commission where she has advocated that the entire town have status of preferred siting for solar panels. And I feel that we are putting ourselves, if we appointed a person with that background, and I would also point out that the Energy Commission has a third-party website where they list businesses as, as if they were working or representing the town. And so I can see cases coming before the DRB, which could either involve those businesses or upon which it could be said Linda had already made a decision, so she'd be effectively voting twice. And I think that this is really a disservice to any of the folks who would be opposing any developments that came before the review board. And we should, as indicated by the guidance, avoid anything that has the appearance of a conflict of interest. And I think that this definitely has a conflict of interest appearance that could be brought up in any judicial proceedings that were appealing a review board decision.
Okay, thank you, Marcia. Does anyone have a comment to address Marcia's concern or thoughts? Do you agree? Does anyone agree with Marcia's concern? Go ahead, Rob.
On some decisions, on committee decisions, Development Review Board, it is possible to abstain from voting if one feels that there might be a conflict of interest on a particular subject. My experience previously with the Development Review Board was that the number of times solar energy changes that would be judged by the board are somewhat rare. That's it.
Yeah, so, yeah, thank you, Rob. Mary, did you have a?
It sounds like that with Rob's logic, that Linda could recuse herself in the case where the decision had to be made in terms of solar energy siting, and also that in his experience, these instances are rare. So I think there is a process by which this appointment would still work. And I think that Linda would, I think she'd just bring a lot to the role on the DRB.
Right, and let me just say, like, there would be an ability to recuse themselves if there was any reason for Linda Gray to have a conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest, yeah.
In solar siting, but she is not a solar developer, nor does she work for a solar developer, and nor would she profit from solar development. So I don't see a conflict of interest as I understand it. And to the extent that there is an appearance of that, I don't think there is one.
Actually,
Go ahead, Marcia, and then I see some other folks.
the conflict of interest definition is a situation where a public officer has publicly displayed a prejudgment of the merits of a particular quasi-judicial proceeding. And basically, I think, you know, we've now got Article 25 on the books. Pardon?
36, but go ahead.
25, 36, and 11. 36 we have on the books, and that could definitely mean that we're going to have more things coming in front of both us and the board. And I think it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me to have someone who would necessarily have to recuse themselves. I think that we have other folks, you know, I keep saying it, we have other folks in this town who, if they felt welcome, would stand up, and we've seen them stand up and ask to be on boards and participate. And I think we should be welcoming them.
And appointing Linda Gray doesn't mean that we're not welcoming people to
No.
apply.
There are other opportunities to apply too, because there are other vacancies.
And we put those, yeah.
They do have to step up. They do have to step up and apply. That's part of serving the public.
And we have to approve them.
That's right. Okay,
Well,
so I see it. Claudia, did you have a comment? I wasn't sure. Okay. Rod Francis, would you like to sort of, you work with the Development Review Board. Would you like to, as a staff member, would you like to share some insight?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Rod Francis. I'm the clerk to the DRB and the zoning administrator and the planning director when I'm not those other things. I don't want to interject on behalf of Linda's application or speak against it. I just want to provide some factual background to the deliberations of the DRB with regard to solar projects. So, and I feel like I've said this many times in many different communities, but it always needs to be repeated. Solar panels of a certain size or solar panel projects of a certain size are the preserve of the Public Utilities Commission. And so the Development Review Board actually is not in the jurisdictional chain for solar projects. And that goes down to and is as small as kind of a household level system, which is tied to the grid. So it's, I'm losing my terminology instantly as I speak here, but it's the, it's where you are grid tied, you sell your excess electricity to the utility, and your meter goes backwards when you do. So those are effectively as of right installations, and then any larger installation than that is, as I said, the preserve of the Public Utility Commission. So the Development Review Board, in only very rare circumstances, would actually contemplate a solar panel project, and it would be a situation where an applicant wants to have a fairly large installation, but does not want to sell their power to Green Mountain Power as the utility, and it would be entirely for their use and not grid tied. In other words, outside the jurisdiction of the Public Utility Commission, then it may fall to the Development Review Board, and even then, you know, the kinds of things that you would consider are usually pretty narrow in terms of the project, without wanting to go down that rabbit hole about what it is that the DRB would look at. In that sense, I think that anybody that had a history perhaps of representing the Energy Committee or working around those issues in town might well recuse themselves, but that would be something that the panel themselves, the DRB, would contemplate. And so I just wanted to be clear that in my time with the Norwich Development Review Board, we've never contemplated a solar panel installation or a solar installation. And in the previous 2 towns that I worked in a similar capacity, it never came up. So I just want to say that.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Red. Marcia, would you like a follow-up?
Yeah, I think that, you know, rare things do happen, and leaving things in the hands of people who may or may not make the right decision can be a problem. But at the very least, I think it's inappropriate to have those companies listed on a website that purports to have any relationship to the town, especially since they could definitely somehow come up in front of the Development Review Board or other boards on this committees in this town.
Right, and I think so. I will just say, Marcia, I think like that's an important point that you've raised, and I think we're seeing the need for a future agenda item on, you know, some kind of guidance for committees, and I think like, you know, our agendas are always packed, but the extent that we have more time with our committees and like invite them and convene them into our meetings, like I think some of those issues, that specific issue can be addressed. But I do think that's like a separate matter. I mean, the one thing I will say is I feel comforted by, not comforted, but I take confidence in that the DRB has, as a governing body, as Rod alluded to, has a process for determining on conflicts of interests in the rarefied moments that should happen. I also believe that Linda Gray doesn't have a conflict of interest. And furthermore, if her work was part of a governing public body, it was part of the Energy Committee. It wasn't a committee that was solely in her name, right? Like, so it was, and I just want to say, Marcia, and then I'll take some more comments, and then we should really move on. That I think, and I won't speak for Linda, but I think, you know, she's not the chair of the Energy Committee right now, and I think that may very well have been in response to some of your comments about, you know, having sort of overstating influence and wanting to sort of share space, right? And I think, you know, you give a concern, and I do think there was an acknowledgement of hearing that concern, right? And so I hope that is appreciated. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Final comment. I hope that we're going to have a review of the ethics and conflicts of interest policies, because I think they probably should be the same across the board for all of our appointees and the board.
Okay. Certainly, I certainly agree with the code of ethics, and our town manager has raised a need for a code of ethics for other reasons as well. So it's a matter of agenda. So sorry, and I don't mean to talk back. I'm just trying to acknowledge that I hear you. Anyone else have any further comments or acknowledgements before we call the question? Okay, so let's call the question. All in favor on the appointment of Linda Gray to the Development Review Board, please raise your hand. Okay, let's roll call. Mary, how do you vote?
Vote yes.
Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Claudette, how do you vote?
Yes.
Marcia, how do you vote?
No.
And I'm a yes. Okay. Thank you, and thank you, Linda Gray, and thank you, Marcia, for your concerns. I respect your vote. Or the anyway. Whew. Let's move on to the wastewater study, where we could dive more into. Okay, so wastewater study. Board will be asked to take action on Planning Commission's recommendation to pursue a wastewater study for the village district. A motion will be required. In the packet, we had a memo from the town manager and the planning director, and we also had some of the adopted resolution language of the Planning Commission, which sort of gives some insight into the work that informed their recommendation. And so we could hear a little bit from Rod and Herb a little bit about the contents of the memo, but I think we could also maybe just dive into board member questions. I think I'll just state that it provides some background and context and goes into sort of the particulars of the possible funding source, and they suggest a motion for us as well. So would folks want to hear a little bit from Rod and Herb, or would we like to just dive into questions?
I'd like to hear a little bit.
Okay, I suspect.
We'll have some questions later.
So Rod, can you, I don't know where you went, there you are. And so Rod, would you sort of walk us through a little bit of the memo? So a little bit on the high level for us.
Sure. Let me just organize my screen here so that I can talk it and read at the same time, hopefully. So just as a background to the document, the issue surrounding wastewater has been a topic of discussion in Norwich on and off for as long as I've been working here, which is now over 3 years. And in the process of developing the town plan, there were several discussions focused around the existing conditions in the village and the future of the village in terms of development, which is not to say necessarily any expansion, but just the continued viability of the residential and commercial properties in the village with regard to wastewater. And so in that process, it became clear that the 2005 study could do with being revisited, and that I'm sorry, I've got something going on here with my computer. As part of that process, the Planning Commission, through a series of public forum meetings and through surveys, established that the level of concern about the information contained in the 2005 study and the current conditions warranted consideration of a wastewater study. As a side note and as background to that, of course, people are also familiar with the travails of the Marion Cross School and their wastewater system and efforts on their part to resolve that issue. I don't want to necessarily go into that unless people have got explicit questions about that, but just to say that it's one of the examples that people have often referred to as an indication that more information is needed. So a typical study of this kind is usually funded through a single source of funding in Vermont. It's got an incredibly bad acronym, but it is wastewater after all. So the acronym is the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, and there's no vowels in it, so you can't make a word out of it, but that's the way it goes. So it is a fund that receives federal money. It's operated by the Agency of Natural Resources, Department of Environmental Conservation. It exists to support communities like Norwich in Vermont, undertake studies, and then in some circumstances, when that community goes through this process of doing research, and as a community comes together and agrees through a series of votes at town meeting or similar, that they want to pursue a capital project related to wastewater, then the same fund will help support communities undertake a capital project. Now, I want to be really clear that when I say capital project, I don't mean a fully fledged conventional single point wastewater treatment plant that we're used to thinking about. It could mean 2 large community systems, each catering to 10 properties, or it could be, when I say community system, I mean an in-ground soil, what they call a soil-based system. So a capital project can actually be, in this context, pretty small. We're not necessarily talking a tens of millions of dollars worth of wastewater treatment plant at all. It could be quite considerably smaller than that. And there are many examples across the state of parts of villages or parts of village downtowns or certain properties being connected to a shared wastewater system that, you know, and that is supported in part by the state. The details about how much money the state would give for a capital project are not really clear at this point, partly because we don't really know what we're looking for. So the whole point of the study is to establish, first of all, do we have a problem? If we have a problem, what is the nature of the problem? If we have a problem that we can define, what are the possible options for solving that problem? One of those could still be do nothing, because of the cost or complexity of resolving that issue. So I want to just, again, emphasize and lay out that in any kind of systematic planning study, option number 1, do nothing, is always there. Obviously, a decision, an action to do nothing is still a decision, and it can have consequences, but it is a viable option. Then what the community could possibly contemplate is a set of other solutions. Each will have costs and benefits. Each will disadvantage some people and advantage others in terms of their property. Each of those will have to be weighed and considered in their own terms at the time. The best way to do that is to actually have solid scientific information from a group of consultants who specialize in doing this kind of work and don't have a vested interest necessarily in the outcome, but they do have a professional commitment to providing the community with the kinds of information that the community will need to make any further decisions. And so the purpose of the wastewater study would be to, as I said, as I outlined, identify if there's a problem, quantify the problem if there is, suggest potential solutions, give broad, somewhat rubbery numbers for capital projects that would be intended to solve it, and also potentially give, you know, order of magnitude numbers to explain the operating costs of any capital project solution that might be pursued. And then it would be expected that if the community then agreed that a capital project was a worthwhile pursuit, then there would be further studies that would be more detailed, focusing on that particular solution that the community had settled on, and give the community yet more information before there was any commitment to obtaining you know, the permission to borrow money and or spend money on a large-scale capital project. So the terms of this support from the state, because it's actually a loan, that's where the revolving loan fund part of the acronym comes from. The terms are, the state will pay for 50% of the consultant's fees. The town is responsible for the other 50%. The state will effectively loan the town the 50% that the town is responsible for. And the terms of that loan are, you don't have to start paying back for 5 years. So you have a 5-year holiday on your loan repayments to start. Then you make 5 equal payments for each calendar year subsequently after the 5th year. So if I've got the calendar right, and we were to pursue this in Norwich, it would mean that payments didn't start till 2026, and you'd be making 5 equal payments for the 5 years following. So that would be through 2031. I'm sure some of you will be contemplating not being on a select board by then, so you could just leave a post-it note on the fridge or something and let them know that that's their problem. And that's always the nicest way to do it. And then you, at that point, you know, the town would have had plenty of time to contemplate what it wanted to do. If the town did select to go forward with the capital project and that capital project did get undertaken, it would get support again from the same fund. And then instantly the money that the town owed on the study would be rolled into the project cost of the capital project, and that would reset the clock on repaying it. So you would push it off even further. I would expect the study such as this to be around $30,000. It may be a little more, maybe a little less. 50% of 30,000 is $15,000. So it's 5 annual payments of $3,000 a year, which in the overall scheme of things, I don't think is an outrageously large amount of money.
So Rod, can you just say, you're saying you expect it to be 30,000, just to clarify this.
Yes.
It's subject to an RFQ process.
Yes.
So can you talk about the RFQ process and how it interacts with the revolving loan fund a little bit for board members?
Right. So if the town decides either tonight or subsequent to tonight that it wants to pursue a wastewater study, and then it wants to pursue this source of funding, which I would assume you would, given that the terms I think are very generous, then we would approach the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund, Tom Brown, and go through the process of applying to the program. In my early conversations with him over the phone and via email, I have not been given to understand that there's anything more complex than simply saying that you would really like to participate. And then we would develop an RFQ. So I'm assuming that that would be Herb and myself. The RFQ would need to meet the procurement policies of the town and the state, which are pretty, they're pretty similar. And then the RFQ, the draft of the RFQ would be reviewed by the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund staff. As long as it meets their requirements, then it would be approved, and we would move to the next step, which is to publicize the RFQ and wait for the responses, and then we would interview candidates and make a selection of a consulting firm and go through the typical process that you're all familiar with in terms of retaining the services of a consulting team to work on the study. We would hope that if the town was to pursue this, the earliest we could get an RFQ approved by the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund office would be in the July-August timeframe, which is quite brisk. It may be a little longer than that, depending on how busy they are. Then you would normally wait, you'd expect a sort of a 6 to 8 week turnaround process, waiting for the consultants to respond to the RFQ. Then there'd be an internal review process, and then a selection, and then going under contract with the consultants. So it would be late fall, early winter, I think. Ideally, it would be amazing if it was much before Thanksgiving. This presents kind of some problems in terms of doing field work. If that we're keeping with this calendar, it might be that they elect to commence their work in spring, or they may want to do some work over winter. It depends. And then the only other factor here that we need to contemplate is that because of the ARPA money and a lot of money moving into Vermont and many states to support infrastructure projects, this small pool of qualified engineering firms that could do this work may be really busy doing other things. And so it may be a matter of, we get permission from the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund, we get the RFQ out, we make a decision, we hire a firm of consultants, but then we have to wait because they're not available until some point in the future.
Okay, thank you, Rod. So I think right now, let's take board member questions about the content of the memo, sort of questions of clarity, and then maybe we'll have a discussion. So right now, maybe like questions of clarity for like Rod or Herb or anything like that. Go ahead, Rod.
My question is, do we know whether or not any of this engineering study, any of the facets of it have already been done by school district? And if so, are we able to take advantage of that? And if not, will we be able to share that with the school district?
Great. So I wrote down that question, Rob. Does anyone have more questions for Rod and Herb, and then we'll go and answer them all. How's that? So go ahead, Marcia.
Mine is less of question, but more of concerns. And this is about money. And basically, if we are going to spend money, we need to have approval from the voters. I don't think just because it's a loan, it doesn't mean we're not spending voter money. So it's not endless deep pockets, and we have to look at whether this has been authorized. If it hasn't, then we have to look at a warrant and get it voted. The second concern I have is that in looking at the capital budget program that we have in the master financial plan, it became clear to me, and I got it confirmed by the VLTC attorneys, that a capital budget and program as anticipated by the statutes is to effectuate the implementation of a municipal plan. Problem is, our municipal plan, page 46, has a chart where we have capital budget items. And there are 6, and none of them are about wastewater. So I don't see that we have any authority to proceed with this at the moment, that we'd have to either A, amend the town plan, and or B, well, definitely B, get approval from the voters to spend money.
Okay, I mean, these are questions that we should definitely get some town manager advice on. So thank you, Marcia. Do you have any other questions? Any other questions?
I would just, I was going to ask the same question that Rob did. If the taxpayers are paying for studies, how many are being done? Has the town done some? And I just don't know that it's clear, and not the town, the school district. We can't be duplicating efforts.
Right. And yeah, and we'll get into that because we have a little bit of insight while understanding we haven't had substantial conversations with the school. Any other questions? And we'll do a round of them to our staff. Mary, did you have something?
I don't really have a question, but I was encouraged by Rod's mention that there might be a way to have shared systems, shared in-ground systems. I'm aware of a system that the Thetford Academy and the Thetford Elementary School use that is shared, but it is gravity feed, and they did have their own forest where they could run the line and then do a large mound system. I'm intrigued by it because it's sort of, I think that the conversation has been about individual residences or businesses that each have their own system, or it's been about very large systems like a shared system with a neighboring town. But I would like to know about sort of a mid-sized systems that might be a good fit for, just what the village or the area on Route 5 South. I think some of those businesses have indicated that their systems are getting a little tired or overtaxed. So I'd be interested in finding out that kind of information from a study like this.
Okay. So I phrase these as questions, and so maybe we can ask them of town staff if that's okay.
Well, I think you could probably frame them as questions, yeah.
Can we do that? Is that okay with board members? So let's begin with Marcia's actually. Herb, do we require authorization from the voters or approval from the voters to proceed with a wastewater study? Would be one part of the question. So I'm gonna try to figure out how to do this. Okay, so I'm gonna mute. I'm mute. And I turn off.
Ooh,
And then
there you go.
Herb can talk.
We put Roger in. Oh, there we go. All right, can you hear me okay, Marcia?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not sure I heard a question, more of a statement or an opinion, but in terms of paying for this particular study. I think that you do have a professional services line item. You do have particular areas of the budget that you might be able to look at from that standpoint. It is something that can be, the payback of it can be deferred for a number of years in order to get you through a budgeting process, to specifically have some of that particular discussion. I don't disagree with you that you know, voters should have the ultimate say in the budget and monies that go with.
We lost her. Some sound happened. Okay, you're back now. Go ahead.
So, so basically, I'm not disagreeing with Marcia that voters, you know, have the take on what we have in the budget and at the bottom line. But there is the purpose for the select board as representing the public as a whole in order to spend the particular money along with my office. It is in this particular case, it would be a loan, and the payback of it would be such that you would have potentially another budgeting process in order to identify the funds that you deal with. I understand your question after that may be, well, are we putting the cart before the horse? I think that's a discussion that needs to be among the board. I think what we're trying to do with regard to the wastewater study is to implement in part the town plan in trying to update wastewater, to examine the village to make it as viable as possible. Excuse me. We have had at least some preliminary discussion with the school to try to work with them because they clearly are a key stakeholder if we went forward with this particular study. So I think in kind, they would appreciate the knowledge that we could afford them. I think probably their concern at this point is their particular timing of their system. They are presently and will be doing so this fall, continuing to pump or, you know, to have a truck show up when they need it on a regular basis so that they're not using the current system. So there is an interim solution that is in place that obviously they don't want to do that for a long extended period of time, but it is in place at least for a short period of time that may allow the processes to catch up with each other. But obviously no guarantee on that. So again, back to the money issue, I think it really is a decision that belongs with the board at this particular time frame. We can always try to arrange the RFP process so that it is either in line with a budgeting process or have further discussion with the state in terms of what might be any other requirements of the loan. In other words, would they fund us the full amount up front, but ultimately we're paying back the 50%. So, and even with the opportunity to defer that for 5 years down the road, that might present, you know, five separate opportunities to raise the funds for that. So the decision of moving forward is really I think the bigger decision tonight. And then with regard to the funding of it, it would be, you know, on all of our shoulders to defend the need for the funds to complete the study. If that's I don't know if that's making sense to you, but
yeah. So so now you can hear me. Yeah. Is that right? Okay. So thank you. And I want Marcia to follow up and get to her next question, but you mentioned that you know, the school is continuing, the school, which is a key stakeholder, and that, you know, their studies and their work will make our study more richer and sort of inform this study as a nature of them being a key stakeholder in the village area, right? Of which the study is for. So I just want to pivot a little bit to Rob's question where he asks, do we know if any of their work, the school's work, or any of their engineering studies would benefit our study, and how will their future studies also inform our study? So Rod, could you address that a little bit? Because Herb referenced a meeting where you sort of touch base with the school on this study.
So the Marion Cross School Board, the Norwich School District Board, maintains a website through the SAU 70 website, and they have offered that all the studies that they have undertaken with taxpayer funds and all the work that they've done with a range of consulting entities is available through that website. And so they're clear and have stated more than once that the information that's been publicly funded is in the public domain. That would be useful for this, and I'm not assuming that we're going to proceed with a study, but if there was a wastewater study to be undertaken by the town, then those publicly available documents would be, I think, very useful information for any consulting team. And the consulting teams, it's a small professional community. I don't expect them to be, reluctant to reach out to any of the engineers or geologists that have done work for the school and have follow-up professional questions. That seems to me to be perfectly plausible. Where there are boundaries, if you like, between the professional work that's been undertaken for the school and the professional work that would be undertaken on behalf of the town, I would expect that the professionals involved would be really effective at self-regulating, if you like, and they would be clear, and they would accept and understand who they're representing and who they're working for. From a technical standpoint, the school has an acute problem and has explored a range of solutions and has sought data and confirmation from an engineering standpoint as to what the viable, potential viable solutions are. So it's a narrowly cast problem, and then it's generated some narrowly cast research and some narrowly defined findings with some assumptions about how best to solve the school's problem. I would say that one of the advantages and one of the serious contributions of a wastewater study for the village of Norwich would be that it would be much broader than that, and it would seek to establish, is the school the only one with a problem of that size? Are there other property owners in the village area that are hampered in terms of their ongoing viability or their future because they don't have access to a better wastewater treatment solution? So that's actually an important question for the ongoing viability of the village, as well as any kind of question that the community might want to contemplate about expansion or growth. So I feel like the school's been clear that they're willing to offer that information, that they've made it accessible, that they participate if and when the schedule of any wastewater study that the town pursues coincides with or complements the work that they're continuing to do because they've still got an acute problem. On the question of the money, if I could just touch on that briefly. Okay. Herb is correct to point to the professional services line item in the budget, which the select board, this current select board, does have the authority to, make calls on, demands on. The town plan is an adopted document. The nexus between the capital plan as it's discussed in the town plan and the actual capital plan is weak in Vermont statute, and it's certainly weak in the Norwich case. In other jurisdictions, so for instance, in the neighboring state, New Hampshire, the Planning Commission actually holds the capital plan hearings and is responsible for putting together the capital plan and the capital budget. That's not the case in Vermont, and so I don't think that Norwich is an outlier in terms of being negligent with the way the capital plan is treated in the town plan. It's pretty much the norm. And the budgeting process, including the capital plan, are the preserve of the select board, which they present to the voters at town meeting, and town meeting votes on it. Now, so I just wanted to be clear about that link.
Yeah,
and
then, so just that was addressing sort of what I wrote down for Marcia's sort of question about the capital budget, is to sort of effectuate from the plan.
And then lastly, if, for instance, and I understand the sensitivity. I was being somewhat flippant about it before, about leaving a post-it note on the refrigerator door in the town kitchen. But if you were wanting to be a really responsible select board and work through the issues of
We do.
hampering the decision-making abilities of a subsequent select board that you may not be a part of, then there are ways that you can address that. So $3,000, $3,000 a year for 5 years, starting 5 years from now, actually under under regular circumstances, that still strikes me as being a very comfortable arrangement and a very good deal. The town plan expires in 2028, if you need to know that as a sort of a crossover point. So it would be good to see some progress on town plan action items between now and 2028. The select board could initiate or go to the voters next year to initiate a sinking fund to set aside the $3,000 per year starting next year, if you agree to do the study now, so that by the time the repayments are due, you've actually got the $15,000 or whatever it is set aside ready to do it. And of course, if you wanted to be incredibly conscientious, you could just pay your way right now. You could agree to do the study, and then you could go to the voters in next year's town meeting in 2022 and say, look, we've got this great deal, but for the sake of just making it really clear, do you want to pay it now, right? So you have options which would not burden a future unknown select board, and those options would also signal to the voters that you're very serious from a fiduciary standpoint, that you didn't want to burden a select board in the future, that you're wanting to make this commitment now, and that commitment involves setting aside the funds or actually setting a tax rate at a level that will mean that those funds are collected now rather than later. So I just wanted to put that out there as options for you to contemplate. Budgeting is not my area of expertise per se, but I would say that you do have options available to you to solve that perception problem and the reality, which is that you could be burdening a future select board.
Okay, and then so Mary sort of had a sort of discussion about she was sort of imagining sort of the size of different systems and sort of like referencing sort of other communities that sort of have these sort of systems that she was discussing about. And this study is in part finds some pre-engineering solutions to some of what you were calling problems that have been identified, but it also, the study also defines what might be a goal of a community or what some might consider an opportunity, right? Like if they have a goal for affordable housing or what have you. So do you have anything that you would like to say about sort of a pre-engineering study work in addition to sort of identifying goals and problems? And then we're at time. So then
I want to try and be as brisk as I can. So the first thing is to actually try and understand the scope of the problem. And so that there's lots of natural limits, if you like, to thinking about implementing some level of sewer service in or around the village. So it might be that the most practical solution is a series of in-ground designs that just carve off, say, a particularly difficult neighborhood where the level of failure is quite high for existing wastewater systems. Or we find a parcel of land where people are interested in seeing further development and have that development be dense enough that having a collective wastewater treatment system there or in an adjacent area is the most effective form of development. And the engineers, because of their background and experience in designing these systems, I should say that the engineers that we would be hiring have a background in designing and permitting and installing wastewater systems at different scales. And so some of them can be quite large, but in ground. So catering up to 10 or 20 or 30 houses or an entire small village commercial district, small village commercial district. So there are technical solutions that could be suitable that are not particularly large. We can't say what the design would be or what the cost would be, but it would be the responsibility of the consulting firm to actually identify the best products to solve the problems that are identified.
Okay, great. And so now we're at time. So we're gonna talk for maybe 10 more minutes board discussion, and then we'll decide if we want to make a motion or what have you. So any other discussion or questions, board members? And then I can also take public comment because I see that we have some. Go ahead, Marcia.
If anyone else on the board has something to say first, I'll wait, but I do have things to say.
Anyone would like to, we call that step up, step back. So Marcia is like stepping back, so someone could step up. Does anyone have something to say, or Marcia can, go ahead, Mary.
I think it would be helpful to the town to go through this process to gain more information. And also, our last study was in 2005. And I don't believe it involved a professional look at what was happening. So I'm inclined to support it.
Okay. Go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, I'm also inclined to support it. And I think that given that we have 5 years to come up with our 50% of the study, gives us multiple options on how we can plan to pay that money back.
Okay, thank you. All right. Go ahead, Marcia.
I sort of take the approach of following the money. So we may have a professional services line item. I don't know where that came from. I don't know what the people voted for, thinking they were going to get for those professional services. But, you know, we could say we're going to have, I don't know, a professional look at the feasibility of replacing Tracy Hall with a 5-story building, and we'll just push that down the road. I think even though we push things down the road, we're doing something without the approval of the people. So I want you to all separate. I'm not against this study per se. I'm against the process. I think that what we need to do is follow the law. And although Rod seems to think he knows the law, when I went to law school and was an attorney in New Hampshire, we basically look at the statutes and we read the 4 corners of the documents. And so I'm looking at what I heard from the VLCT lawyer, I'm looking at the statutes, and I'm looking at the money. And I really think, given we have heard that this whole process might take a little while, that the school is pumping and they'll probably pump through the fall, that winter is not a great time to be doing these studies anyway, that almost gets us to March. Why can't we say we are in agreement with the idea of having a study, but we're not going to take money out of a slushy professional service line item and promise the people will pay this extra money in the future when we don't know that the people in this town really want to do that. So I would much prefer to say, we're on board with the idea of a study, but we want it to be a line item warrant for March. That gives everybody a lot of time to get their ducks in order. And we're not losing anything in the interim, except maybe getting somebody lined up, which we can do later anyway. And I think good fiduciary responsibility to this town requires that we make sure we're not promising to pay monies that the town hasn't agreed or said that they want to pay. So I say, let's put it on the warrant in March, get the ducks in order in the meantime. And oh, by the way, I do think that that town plan is very specific about the capital projects. Maybe you could get that adjusted.
Okay, thank you, Marcia. Does anyone sort of, go ahead, Claudette, and then I'll have some public comments.
I guess to some, I think there's a fine line between what we as a legislative body, given a budget, an approved budget, can select what we spend that money on. That's not like wages and salaries and benefits. So I don't think everything needs to go before the voters. If we believe that we have a method of paying for this study outside of having to go to the voters for funding approval. And I think we have that ability. So there you go.
And I will say too, like Marcia has sort of like, Marcia, if I may, this has sort of been one of the things that has sort of characterized your work with us since March, right? And I think like we maybe just need to actually like have an agenda item, have the discussion on that issue, because I just want to be clear, like I'm a lover of process, and I'm a very dialectical person, right? And so I would love to sort of get a good process that sets up the town to be successful. But I don't believe that we are doing something in violation of statute or that is illegal. And if you believe that we are doing something illegal or in violation of statute, please be clear on that. But I don't believe, and so thus, if it's a matter of process and improving process, I take your point, but that doesn't stop me from taking action on this from as I see it. Go ahead, Marcia.
So follow up. I hear what you and Claudette are saying. If we have committed to this study and we are committing effectively to paying back this money in the future, at what point are we asking, do we not have to ask people to pay for that in the future? Do we always have money that we just say is ours to spend? And if so, how does that appear in the budget?
Yeah, Mary, and then I'm going to take some public comment, and then we're over. So we need to just, yeah. Go ahead, Mary.
I think that professional services line item has been used for a number of different purposes, and it is at the discretion of the select board and in some cases the town manager. So one of the uses, for instance, has been to pay for Freedom of Information Act requests, which no one in the town has voted for people to make these requests, but the town has to pay. And it is important that these requests, and it is the law, that they have to be made, but they are not the result of a process of a town saying, I think there's a problem. So there's been a lot of legal action. There's been a lot of discussion about open meeting law. And of course, we want to answer those questions for the public, but they did not arise during a traditional Vermont town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
They arose through individuals that felt there was an issue and took it upon themselves to use, these other avenues to find the information. And the town is stuck with that. So.
And so you're just offering an example. So go ahead, Marcia. I need to take public. I'm going to take a comment, and then we have to.
When I made a Freedom of Information Act request, I paid for it because there is a statutory requirement, or there's a provision that the town can charge. So the town charged in one of the instances. And so I get that sometimes we have to do things. I'm just worried about things that we do that are actually contractual as opposed to things that we're responding to. And I see this as contractual. So I'm wondering if someone can tell me just quickly how much money is in the professional services line item?
Budgeted for the forthcoming fiscal year.
Right.
that you know.
In front of it, it's like 50, it's like $52,000 or something.
Yeah, so the best estimate, and we're calling from the budget process, was about 52,000.
Okay, so just final, I would just like to see us put this on a warrant because it could become a bigger issue and it does suggest a bigger issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And oh, can you fix it? Sorry. Okay. Are we good? Yeah. No. Yes, I'm good now. Right, and just we had the benefit of some professional staff. I think it was Rod sort of giving some advice on what could be done. So I also appreciated that meeting your concerns in good faith. Okay, I'm going to take public comment because we're 10 minutes over, and then we just need to decide what we would like to do with this. Lisa Close, you were first. Just name and locatable address, please.
Hi, Elisa Close, 64 Partridge Hill in Norwich. I wanted to say that I agree with Marcia, and I'm glad she spoke up because I have concerns about, as a Norwich taxpayer, I have concerns about you folks deciding to spend money that we have not voiced clear direction on. I also had concern about, as Rod said himself, flippant comments regarding stickers on the icebox. I think anything that suggests that it's okay to put off towards the future monies that we haven't as a town voted on concerns me. I think that we as townspeople need to weigh in on this, and deferring the cost to the future is not okay, particularly now. We live in a time where things aren't so predictable as maybe they once were. And regardless of whether it's $52,000 or $5,000 in the discretionary fund, I think that we have an obligation to go through the process that gives you folks the knowledge to move forward with this. I did read the 2005 study. I also attended a wastewater meeting that occurred in Norwich maybe 3 years ago. I could be wrong, but it was never, in neither case was it my sense that the townspeople overwhelmingly supported this. And so I've been here 5 years, but it does cause me some confusion that there's such a push on the select board to move in a direction that personally I've neither read about nor seen in the meetings that I've attended. I would separate the school and the town issues so that the school can get on with what the school needs to do. They need a septic system. Let them do it. But the more parties there are at a table, the more people there are in a room, the more complicated the process is. And I know you guys know that. I would let them get on with it. And if we need a study in the town, we'll get on with that too. But I would suggest with Marcia that is appropriately defined further by having the townspeople vote on that. Thank you. I'll back out and let someone else have the floor. Let me just see how I do this.
Thank you for your public comment. And Pam Smith, go ahead.
Thank you, Roger. Pam Smith, 1445 New Boston Road. To Marcia's point, I'd like to refer you to page 62 of your packet. Town budget for professional services, $51,667. Year-to-date, $80,660, or $29,000 overspent. So when you talk about having a slush fund, you know, the more expenses you apply to that, the more we overspend. So I think that you have to be very careful about what things that you put in there because you run that risk of overspending in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a recommended motion that came along with the memo. It is up to board members if someone would like to make one. Mary, you're on mute.
I move to authorize the town manager to draft and release a request for qualifications and submit an application to the Department of Environmental Conservation Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund Program in support of undertaking a wastewater study for Norwich Village and adjacent areas.
Is there a second? Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, roll call. Mary, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Claudette, how do you vote?
Yes.
Marcia, how do you vote?
No,
Yes. Okay, thank you. And we're a little over time. So we'll take our 5-minute break and we'll come back at 8. Or that's more like a 3-minute break. So 8:02. Okay, I pressed record or resume the recording. It's now 8:03. I'm just looking for, yeah, there's recording returning. Thank you for the quick break. Okay, so we're a little bit over time. We're about 15 minutes over time. So the discussion of the policing study reform, discussion of policing study reforms and process. Board will be asked to review the draft of the potential RFP language. And so at our last meeting, we discussed that we would like to have our conversations move to an RFP process and have some third-party assistance, right? And Claudette and Marcia prepared that for the benefit of our discussion. So I know that I had a bunch of sort of comments. They were pretty substantial. Would we benefit a little bit from Claudette and Marcia just sort of talking about it? I don't necessarily want to do a whole walkthrough of what they submitted, but I do think maybe just to ground us, we could hear a little bit from them. Does that make sense? How do we feel about that? Okay, Mary, go ahead. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I would feel good about that. And I think they, did do quite a lot to develop this idea. I'd like to hear a little bit about their idea of a timeline, just in addition to any other remarks that they want to make.
Yeah, so let's get into it. So Claudette and Marcia, why don't you ground us a little bit about some of your thinking, what you produced, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Claudette, do you want to talk about time?
Well, I'll back up a little bit first. So I borrowed heavily from the Brattleboro's RFP and thought that Marcia and I had produced a document that had deliverables. The timelines in there were really strictly arbitrary. And I believe I made that comment in some comments. Given that this is not up for a vote tonight, it's pushing that timeline even further out. So best case scenario, if we agree to go this route with some amendments to the document, at best, we wouldn't be able to approve those until our next scheduled meeting, which I believe is July 7th, somewhere around there.
But let's go with your instincts to back up a little bit really quickly, Claudette. So what is it that you found, like you said, you borrowed from an RFP process for Brattleboro, who conducted sort of a review of policing through an RFP process. So what was it that you most borrowed? What was like most important to carry over into this draft?
Hold on, let me pull it up.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but I think that'll help.
That's okay. So the what the group would be looking at, or what the facilitators would be doing, collecting community data, meeting with community members, stakeholders, police department, examining all of that, having the meetings scheduled at a time where people could attend, not necessarily a Wednesday evening at 6:30, but to have them all over times of days and days of the week. The inclusion of a community committee is also another piece. The requirements of the study, I pulled heavily from Brattleboro. The guidelines, the facilitator, the scope of the study, measures of success, and facilitator qualifications.
Okay, great. And so Marcia is just sort of as like as another person who worked on this, I guess, same question, right? Like, what is it that you wanted to make sure that was either carried over from our conversations, board member memos, or the Brattleboro document that was important for this?
Essentially, I found myself thinking a lot about the way the committee would function and what it would be comprised of. And I wanted to make sure that anything that is composed is fair and equitable, so that all parties, you know, whichever side of a perceived argument you're on, there's a representation. And so I had suggested that there would be 2 members of the select board who would be non-voting on this committee, and 10 Norwich residents representing the various viewpoints, so that basically there'd have to be either a clear majority opinion reached or a negotiated compromise that could be sent back to the select board. And then the select board would be able to review that and proceed with putting something on, you know, a warrant article or whatever for money, because funding is going to be, again, money's the basis of it all. And so we have to decide on those recommendations what would be required and then proceed. I guess, you know, I think whatever you do, I still think it's important that we retain sufficient coverage while we go through this process. And I think that when we're thinking about this RFP, I think Rob and I both have some hesitation about facilitators. But to the extent that there needs to be some expertise, I think I've put in here that the facilitator should be someone who's familiar with the whole concept, the new concept of policing, so that there is someone who is knowledgeable, and where there are gaps, there'd have to be someone with expertise pulled in, because this should be definitely gleaning the opinions of people who are being served, but also the people who are serving. I think the police need to be included, and then we have to, you know, have something to think about. But if you think about, is this the way to go? If we throw this out and don't do this RFP, don't do, what do we do? Do we just pull together a group of random people?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not happy with the RFP per se, but I'm not sure what the alternative would be.
Right. And so, okay, so I have to facilitate a conversation. I really would like to. So I have some comments to that, but did anyone else have some comments, Mary or Rob? Go ahead, Mary.
In terms of a process, would this be funded through professional services? And is this also a case where the voters should weigh in? Just saying.
So,
Didn't we just, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, this has to be funded from some line item.
So let's focus on the document we have before us, right? And then Herb has signaled that yes, it would come from professional services and
Services.
your
Okay.
budget.
Just saying.
But let's talk about the document. But go ahead, Mary. Did you have any other questions or comments?
I like the balance in the document. I like the fact that, as Marsha was saying, I think it would have a good balance. I think it's kind of odd to have a committee with an even number, because in case a negotiated agreement cannot be made, it does come up. That's why most committees have odd numbers of people who vote. So I find it kind of, I see your point, but I think it might be difficult. It might be time consuming. So.
Yeah. Okay. Rob, did you have anything to say or
Yeah.
add right
Yeah.
now? Obviously, you'll have a lot of things to say, I assume.
Right. My objection to a facilitator is primarily from the experience I've had with facilitators who merely know how to get a process in a meeting together. The RFP is much more heavily a study by a hopefully unbiased, unprejudiced investigator, and is different from what I was thinking of before as being a waste of money. This seems much more to the focused and to the point, even though it's very broad in its considerations.
Right. So what I'm hearing and sort of what I read is, I think first of all, this benefits from sort of like having, the benefit of town staff who do RFPs more regularly and like putting it in sort of more of a familiar sort of RFP format. And obviously we have our own RFP format for that. I think the scope of services were sort of really buried in the document. So, but what I was able to extract and what I sort of rewrote a little, or my revisions would be, is that we want engagement with the public. I think what we want is maybe not a facilitator, but we want a consultant who will determine various methods of this public outreach for a task force. And by the way, I think the task force should have a charge, and that should be written separately from this work, right? So if you want to have a task force that works with a consultant, you should establish that task force and just make mention in the RFP that the consultant is to have a relationship with that task force, and then define what the expectations are of that, right? So engagement with the public could also have the consultant analyze all data received as a result of the public outreach efforts and provide insights and conclusions to the task force. And the consultant will facilitate that communication between us and the task force members. And I think what Marsha was saying too was that, like, yes, we want engagement with the public. We want to know what people think about public safety and honor some of the curiosities we've heard expressed and also some of the concerns. But we also want a consultant to provide some expertise on emerging trends in policing, understand the current landscape of what other communities do for relevant reform efforts. And I think I'm really interested in this, and maybe some of you are, is also the current legal constraints on policing reform, right? So I think one of the answers is we want, like, for example, one of the things that I've been thinking about is we want to talk, we want emerging technologies to potentially have a role in traffic control, right? Because sort of maybe these stops can ensure less bias, or maybe because these stops can become less dangerous potentially for the interactions. However, if collective bargaining doesn't allow for the replacement of sworn officers with emerging technologies or additions or whatever the term is, I would like to know that before I take on any sort of recommendations of any kind of emerging technology, because I don't want to commit to maintaining that in capital if it's not going to actually do what we would want them to do. So I think I think it's more than a facilitator. We need a consultant to sort of understand that. We also need to understand the consultant should advise a task force on relevant workable recommendations and seek out experts who can offer some insight into policy, behavioral health, mental health. These things you also mention in their document, but I think should be drawn out. And then I really appreciated this consultant will collect and establish community data, perhaps for the purpose of including expressed community needs and reports of harm experienced, perceived or feared by the police. Like centering that as a form of data, I thought was really wonderful that you both did, or that you maybe borrowed. I think that's really important. But then we also want to conduct a review of police department reported statistics, right? And I think to the extent practical, the 911 call data, to determine outcomes based on call type, incident type, and time of day. So it's not this we want to know more about what it is that our officers do. We want to know what are the outcomes, right? So if an officer does a property check, and according to the 2000 study, as a courtesy to a business owner, how many of those lead to arrests of individuals, right? Or how much of it is like truly just about sort of a customer service as it may have been expressed in that I say may, I don't want to speak in precisely, may have been. So I think like understanding the outcomes of your data is something that's often missing in these reports, and I would like to know. I would like to have some data tracing on that. And then finally, like I think it's great that they look at that the committee with the consultant look at the department directives and standard operating procedures, but we have a policy that requires the public posting of these things. And I would like them to facilitate the public posting of that for the task force review, because there might be lots of reasons this past year why our sworn officers were not able to take on that work, right? So I would say, so just to sum up, and you could tell that I was eager to talk, and I apologize, is that I want some engagement with the public, as you've outlined, provide some expertise on emerging trends in policing, relevant reform efforts, and legal constraints on policing reform. Then I would like them to ultimately write a report containing the task force recommendations. I want a real document that is data-driven, and I want that to be a very clear thing. If we're going to use public money, it has to be a report that builds on the future. And then I also just separated out, made it clear what kind of meetings you all wanted. There's a lot of work done on that. And then finally, the budget, they should have a clear breakdown of these expenses. So anyway, so I've reformatted, I pulled out and reformatted a lot of what was there, and that was the work that I did. And I'm gonna step back because I need to hear from all of you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Marcia.
So you kind of confused me there for a minute. Are you talking about a task force being the citizens as opposed to the facilitator expert who's going to actually write the report, and how do they work together?
Well, what I've learned from Claudette and your work is that you want a task force or a group of community members. And then what we are having an RFP for is not just a facilitator, but a consultant who we define the relationship with this standing task force. And that task force with the consultant may choose to take on visits or expertise from stakeholders. And it could also mean that members of the task force are also sort of stakeholders as well. They might have the background in those like areas like mental health or what have you. Does that answer your question?
I guess. Who's writing the report?
The consultant is writing it with, so let me just make sure, that's an important question. I thought of that. The phrasing that I opted for
Number
was,
page 3, no, 9.
So the report is, the consultant will write a report summarizing the task force's advisory recommendations on how to expend town resources to ensure an actual and equitable community sense of health, wellness, and safety, which was the words that you used. The report is to be presented to the select board in December 2021. The report must be drafted by November 2021 and completed by December 8th.
Thank you.
Mary?
So I think that if we go through this effort, I think it will provide valuable information to the town. It's an area where, I think we all want to keep an eye on things. I'm wondering with if the time frame plays out as you describe, is it also going to catch up to the time frame? I believe Herb said that he would not consider rehiring a police chief for 6 months. Are the two timelines going to converge, which may or may not be fine? I mean, it could be actually fine that you open up that search for police chief, but you also have this comprehensive conversation going on in town. So I just don't see them as mutually exclusive, and they may naturally converge, which I think could be a good thing. The other thing is, this is wildly undefined for me as far as cost. I have no idea. And, to solicit a study completely out of the blue, even though we do have discretion with professional services, I don't know how responsible that is. So I'm just throwing it out there. I don't have any idea what this will cost.
Claudette, do you have some insights?
Well, I don't think anybody has any idea of what the cost is going to be. But just because we let an RFP doesn't mean we need to, if the cost is something that we do not feel we can bear, we don't go forward with it.
Okay, but
At
maybe
this time, or we warn it on the March town meeting.
right. I'm not saying to squash it for that reason. I'm just saying we might need to be more flexible in how we think about funding it. And I think the timeline and the money kind of, they work together often. We're over, as Pam Smith pointed out, in our professional services budget already. But maybe if we can sort of work with the timeline, work with what we find out about how much it costs, and it may well be a very good topic for discussion at town meeting if it kind of gets that far.
And
People
just-
can really weigh in, so.
Thank you, Mary. And just to be clear, we're over budgeted in this fiscal year, which is soon to end. We're not over already for the forthcoming fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
I know.
We tend to make a lot of use of that fund.
Yes.
And for various purposes at our discretion and discretion of the town manager. So I just think we should keep an eye on, what will this cost? I do think it'll be valuable for the town. It's very worthwhile, but the time and money part of it, I think we should keep an eye on.
Well, and just to clarify, we're not, as well, Claudette reminded me, thank you, Claudette. We're not slated to take an action necessarily on this.
No, but this is a consideration that I'm bringing up.
But
This
yeah.
is about how the whole thing is framed.
Right.
I hope we can pull it off. I think it will be very worthwhile, but I think we need to consider all, aspects of it, so.
Marcia, did you have a point or was that a comment?
I want to concur with Mary that we need to figure out, I'm very concerned about this professional services budget line item. And I don't think that we should ever overspend anything. So in the meantime, I'm concerned that, I think I've heard that we had 240 hours of service from police, including the 80 hours that a police chief and officer rolled into one do. So I'm just wondering if I'm fine with putting this. In fact, I think it's a good idea to put it on the warrant in March, but in the interim, are we going to have 240 hours, which we used to have, of coverage?
So this, okay. So Claudia, I think you're going to maybe make the point that I would like. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want us to stay focused on this RFP, which is what the agenda item is. And I think that there might be some inaccurate information otherwise, but my personal bias is that we keep this focused on the RFP. And I would love for Roger to share with
Yeah.
Marcia and I his thoughts and invite Rob and Mary and Herb. I know we didn't get this early enough for you to have a chance to respond to, and let Marcia and I work on this and
Work
bring it
on it.
back to our
First reading.
meeting in the first meeting in July
Right.
Yep.
to determine how to proceed.
I
So
think
this
that's,
is similar to a first reading then of policy, is what you're saying, similar to that?
we're just discussing really. And, you know, I think I sort of, as you detected, I sort of had like wanted to sort of separate it out by, you know, these four areas of having a consultant through engagement with the public, expertise on emerging trends, writing a report containing the task force recommendations. And I'll continue to think in those kinds of areas. And then Herb too also had one of Herb's questions, I think, like, one question, Herb made a point that, you know, you need to sort of, there are things that sworn officers are obligated to do sort of, and that needs to sort of be acknowledged as part of this. And then we could also be more specific about how we want to enhance or not enhance things that are done by the Vermont Criminal Justice Bureau and Rule 13 and some of these things. So, and then, and then, yep. Okay, so actually, maybe unless other board members have any other comments, and I'll take some public comment, I think like Claudette's suggestion is good. I also think that another workflow is that we do need to sort of separate everything out, and maybe this is a question for the board, separate anything out that was about that committee and what that committee would look like, needs to be sort of separated out from an RFP and be made into a charge or some kind of other process if we believe that a committee needs to be a part of the consultant's relationship or facility. So anyway, go ahead, Marcia.
Well, just quickly, I think for the consultant's benefit, there should be some indication in there that there would be a committee.
Right. Yes, and their reference, and their reference that they have a charge, but we haven't written that charge. So that's what I'm proposing that we might want to do. But we don't have to, but it would be good to, maybe we can continue that discussion at our next meeting.
And I just want to point out, I know the time, and I know you're cognizant of the time too, but
yes.
Herb, do you have to, you have to leave at 9? Is that?
I would like to leave at 9, yes.
Herb would like to leave at 9, yep. So, I'll take a public comment and then we'll maybe wrap up this item. I think okay, is that okay? Charlotte Metcalf, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess the question I've had all along is, what is the genesis of this whole discussion? And Roger, I think your comments in the most recent part of this discussion clarified the fact that it is something that you came into this with whole cloth and have been very interested in doing. And I gather other members of the board had discussed it with you before the public became aware of it. Certainly I came into it, I was a late comer to it, and it was only because of the discussion of Chief Frank leaving. So that's one thing. Sometime I would love to have a history of how this whole discussion evolved, because I don't think it's unnatural or wrong. I just, you know, it I came in on the middle of it, right at a time when I was also concerned about safety. And so the other question I have is for Claudette, who has said that there are some facts that are inaccurate about policing. And I think we really need clarification about the protection we're going to have during the time that this process is going on. Because where I came in, it was sort of, okay, we're not going to have a new chief until we've done this study. That was the first I heard of it. So I'm looking at what the genesis is for the study, right? And then how we are going to muddle along on 180 hours a week of policing when we are accustomed to having what was supposed to be 240 hours a week of policing. So I don't know where my inaccuracy is, but if you add up the hours that we were getting when Doug Robinson was chief, it comes up to 240. Today, according to Herb, it's 3 officers and a part-time officer. So it's different. And you don't have to answer it right now, but I'd love an answer.
Right, and so that relates to our next agenda item, which we're gonna, because we're looking at the time, right? So we'll begin the discussion of that discussion that you referenced, Charlotte, probably a little bit this evening. But I just want to clarify for the record, I have not spoken to any board members about this policing issue outside of warned meetings. But I will say that there's been certainly policing related conversations prior to this, prior to the last few months. So I think for folks who follow our meetings, as you suggested, may or may not have. Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you just said.
I just wanted to clarify that I haven't had any discussions with board members outside of warned meetings on policing matters.
No, but there was a time when Chief Frank left. And around that time, the public learned that she might not be replaced because there was going to be a discussion about the kind of policing that Norwich needed. And that happened. All right. I'm just saying, and I think many other members of the public were unaware of how that happened. That's all.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Right, so I wanted to, I'm gonna lower hand, sorry, lower hand, unpin. Right, so I think the next agenda item, board statement on the policing study reforms and process and context, I think hoped to sort of provide some clarification and answers on sort of, I guess, the genesis, to use Charlotte Metcalf's word. And so it says, board will be asked to define content of future document for potential public posting, draft presented at meeting. And then I was tasked at our last meeting to work on that draft. So I will say that because we have not concluded our RFP work, I wasn't necessarily sure what to inform the public on. I would like to maybe do it all together. But I guess my question that I'll ask for board members before, just really quickly, is what is it that are there sort of high level things that we would like to say now in advance of the RFP being completed, or would we like to wait until the RFP is completed, or the draft of the RFP is completed? So, go ahead, Claudette.
I would like us to wait.
Yeah, I agree.
Wait for, I'm sorry.
To finish our, so I think
Finish the work on the RFP. To let the RFP to see, at least to get to that point.
I think that would be wise as well.
I agree.
I'm sorry. I'm missing something. Before what?
So the agenda,
Before we- oh.
we moved on to, sorry. So we moved on to the agenda item, board statement policing. And so I said, like, should we wait to the conclusion of our RFP process, like the sort of the finishing, drafting of it before we make that board statement? And that's how I felt. And that's why I don't have.
The board statement.
Uh,
Go ahead, Marcia.
I don't see how we can make a statement yet until we finish the process. But that still begs the question for me that we need to provide policing as everybody expected it to be while we're getting to that stage.
Right, and I feel like Herb has done some has substantially addressed that. Our town manager substantially addressed that, right? There is the posting of a temporary officer to have for officer coverage, right? While, while this process is conducted and that we affirmed. So I could say I'm willing, obviously we would address some of that. We would address that history in the statement when we finish our work, but I see a need to do that before or no. Go ahead, Marcia.
So I think a statement has to include all of it, but I think I'd like to know hourly, how many hours do we have for policing? And maybe we don't have somebody hired yet and Herb can do that next time.
So does any board member share these concerns? Or I'm getting the sense that we agree that we should have a statement when we have finished our work. And that's what I would like to sort of hear on consensus and move on, if that's okay. Okay.
I think 3 of us at least said yes to that.
So
How Rob feels about it, but
So I'm seeing yes by consensus, or is there a motion that we should make for clarity?
well, no, I think they're fine. I think at least 3 of us, we didn't hear from Rob, or 4 of us actually.
I think we need to move on until we know. To me, one of the questions as far as whether we support at the moment the status quo is whether or not it's possible even to support the status quo. Are there candidates for the job? We're looking, and how successful the town will be, I don't know, but we're looking
For that 4th option.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm hearing that we should move on from this agenda item and that we have an approach. Okay, so it's 8:40. Herb has signaled to us that we need to, we were supposed to adjourn at 9:10, and he has to leave for family. So let's actually reorder our agenda item, because the executive session agenda item under 11 had two executive sessions for that. So let's can we have board member consensus to reorder the agenda to do that first one now? Okay. So we've done that, and then let's make that motion, and then I have to check in with my colleagues.
I'll make that first motion. How about that?
Yes.
I move to enter executive session under 1 VSA section 313A3 to discuss the town manager improvement plan and annual evaluation, and to invite the town manager to join said executive session.
Is there a second? Okay, seconded by Claudette, made by Mary. Okay, so let's vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. Favor, raise your hand. Is that a hand raised, Rob?
Mhm. Yes.
Okay, I thought you were going A. Okay, so I have no clue with our setup how to make an executive session happen.
You probably Need to take your Zoom computer.
Yeah, so hold on. So we entered, so we moved it, we voted. So I'm going to push the recording on pause. Is there a motion to enter public session?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Rob. Okay, we are now back at 9:01 p.m.
Vote.
Have to vote.
Oh, sorry, let's vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so now we're back in public session. I apologize, some board members saw I thought breakout rooms would be something that was important for this sort of hybrid sitch, and I don't have much experience in it, and but we got you back out of our
Did great.
our breakout room. So okay.
Voice under pressure.
Yes. So it's 9:02. We're considerably over time. Let's talk about the Herb has to go, but I do think he has some he's done some significant work for us for this meeting. So I do want to maybe have the town manager report in some abbreviated way. Maybe he can update us on at least the finance director, right, Herb? So I'm going to ask us to reorder the agenda to have a bit of a town manager report in an abbreviated way for at least some of the most important stuff. And then we'll thank Herb, yes, and then we'll move on to our other agenda. Is that okay? So we've now reached the agenda to have our town manager report.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So can you guys hear me okay? Oh, we're getting the feedback.
Go ahead.
It's still,
You're good.
am I good? Okay. So basically, why don't you come over here, John, and sit next to me. Just so you can see yourself in the camera. Yeah. So I just want to generally introduce John Casey. He's the person that is filling in since Seth's departure. As a result, there you go. So as what he has been focused on for the last couple of weeks, besides me trying to onboard him with some stuff, is trying to do the dashboard. And I think that even though the dashboard looks different than the way Seth has done it, he started with that, and I think he's made some pretty significant improvements that I hope is more in keeping with that comment in the past that was, we'll know it when we see it. I hope now that you've seen it, you know it. But what he's tried to do is put together a general summary of the revenues on a sheet of paper with notes. Do the same thing with the expenses. And then you got excessive monthly reports because you didn't have the dashboard yet. So I sent out the typical PDF NEMRIC reports just so you would have something. But if you stuck with this dashboard, I wouldn't be giving you those normal PDF reports. Instead, you would have the information in the landscape format that I did in the revised packet, as it's the same information, just hopefully just a little bit better cleaned up in presentation for presentation purposes. What John has done through this particular process essentially is show the major revenue sources by the budget. If you just simply took the budget and broke it down into monthly components of that, we would be in the 11th month. So what would be our total if we simply did 11 months of that 12, and then the actual for the 11-month period, which is through May. Then you have the variance, which is actually the variance between that 11-month assumption versus the actuals, and then the percentage. What I've done down at the bottom where you see the total revenue, or what John has done, is he has the total revenue in that same format. What I had him add in though was the variance to the variance of budget to actual. So you see the actual budget that was approved, and then the actuals, and then the variance there. So I think that still is a better representation of where the revenues are, where we stand in the year, meaning about 99% of total revenues estimated. Over on the budget side, similarly, a little bit more breakdown here, but the same general columns. but the categories that you have, what we've tried to do is give you a summary of the general government, public safety, which has a breakdown of the public safety building, the police department, and the fire. Public works by their major divisions, which is highway, buildings and grounds, solid waste, and Tracy Hall. And then what remains essentially are the taxes, insurance, and conservation commission. And then what we further pulled out of that, so that essentially what you see of what I've just very quickly gone over is that's your general operations. And then what I've tried to do after that is say, okay, there are your operations. What was remaining? There's your debt service line item. So I've taken the debt service out of the town budget. It's in two places. There's a debt service set of line items, and then the tower communications tower debt service is actually up in the emergency management section. So we've combined those to just create a singular debt service line item. Then I had John pull out all the new appropriations for designated funds out of the budget and put those in a separate line item. And then of course the other monetary articles. So again, what you can see under the general government, the public safety, the public works, and the other is actually your operations. And then obviously you have to have the other stuff in there, but you can see your debt service, the new funds that are going to go over to the designated funds, and your other monetary articles. So you still have a total budget line item down there like you see, and as it's voted for town meeting. And then again, you've got your notes and then the actual figures that are sort of just played with a little bit that would be from your normal NEMREC reporting. So this is took quite a bit of time from John to, I think, improve it. And this is all on top of him trying to onboard as well and trying to understand some of the budget. So I think he's done a pretty good job. I'd love to get feedback, whether that's, it doesn't have to be tonight, but if someone wanted to make any suggestions by email or what have you, I'd love to get that sense of if this is getting closer to where you'd like to see monthly reports.
I know. So you turn your speaker off.
I'm all, yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, so you can hear me? Okay, so is this, so reference to Herb's comment, like, have we seen it? Is this something that is a substantial improvement? This is something that helps us in our financial reporting, and yes or no would be great by board members. And then very quickly, like, do you have any other comments? Go ahead, Marcia.
I think it's better. I'm still hung up on designated funds and things that are voted. And I really would like, there's always so much talk about designated funds. I would really love to see how much was designated for what, how much have we spent, and how much do we still have? Because I always feel like, it's one thing to say we've got this much revenue and we've spent this much, but we're always having to deal in the world of somebody needs something and, is there money for it? Have the people voted for it? And what does that designated fund look like? So I think we need more of a breakout for that.
Maybe just, here, let me.
The balance sheet each month has been giving you the totals for the designated funds that are in there. But I think maybe for the future, what I'm hearing is maybe a little bit of a presentation about designated funds as part of a financial report, not just the reports themselves, but maybe showing whether it's somewhat illustrative and or the amounts that are in there to show that. Because the balance sheet each month does give you that. There's a separate sheet of paper in that 45-page document that gives you what is in each fund. But maybe there's more of a picture that I need to draw for you folks that describes designated funds and the difference between when you see the term designated funds in the budget versus the separate fund for each of the actual designated funds themselves.
I think personally, it would be nice to see it on that, shorthanded sort of presentation.
Sure. Okay.
And what you're looking at.
Basically what, I'm sorry.
Sorry, We're
not
doing double efforts. So go ahead. I'll stop doing what he's
So,
doing.
all right. So, sorry for the technical stuff. This is, first attempt here. What it would look probably fairly familiar to the page that's in the annual report that's on the designated funds. So when you go in your annual report and you find the budget that's in there, go to I think it's the page immediately after the budget. That's where the designated fund usually sits. And so that would be sort of what I want to try to do is maintain a level of consistency about what the public sees versus what you folks get, so that there's a little bit of commonality, a common denominator of understanding, I guess is the way I would describe it. But if you think there's something else that should go, say, on that page in terms of its presentation, that would be helpful to know. But that's where I would use that as a starting point.
Okay. Well,
So
it's a lot of information, so I appreciate the shorthanded stuff of those 2 pages. And if that sort of thing could just be included, that'd be really great.
okay, Mary, did you yeah, Mary, did you have your comment? Herb and
I
John.
just think it's a very helpful step in the right direction. I like the way it's laid out. It's very readable. I also appreciated the notes. I thought that was a good support as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Any further comments? And then Herb has some updates to round out his town manager report, so we can move on. But yeah, I do think that this is a much more of a tool that can be used for us in the public, the sort of higher level information, and it's definitely an improvement. So, and that's what I was hearing from all of you. Okay, so Herb, do you have some other updates for us?
Am I good now?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to quickly report that as a result of the 6th advertising for a finance director, we had a very successful interview last week. As such, an offer of employment has been made to an individual. He's not accepted at this point, so I'm not really going to share anything more than that, and I'm not going to jinx it either. So, we have talked a little bit. We've adjusted some of the conditional offer to make it acceptable. So it looks like we'll have a finance director starting probably in the August, September timeframe. In the meantime, John will continue to serve in the temp role that he has, and obviously we'll be continuing to try to improve the financial reports in the interim so that it makes it as easy as possible for the new finance director to come in. I think once I'm able to make the more formal announcement, I think you'll be really pleased with the individual, his background, and what he's going to bring to Norwich. The individuals that helped me in the interview process included Cheryl Lindbergh, the treasurer, Mary Layton, the vice chair for the board, Omer Tryman, a former member of the finance committee, Becky Grammer, who's the finance assistant in the finance office right now, and myself. And I think I get everybody from that standpoint. I know that Roger was part of the original process. He was needed to get away for a couple of days, so he wasn't here. So I didn't have the benefit of Roger's input, but it was basically a unanimous understanding as we went through the interview process. It seemed actually was easy. So that's the big news that I would like to share with you tonight. At your next meeting, I'll have more updates for the normal town manager update process, because we have received a couple grants and everything, which is nice.
Okay, but I'm like Richard who's is helping us. I'm like muting, and then he's going to do that work, and then he ends up unmuting, and so I'm clearly used to controlling the Zoom, and I need to stop that. Okay. Okay.
You say something to Herb and let him go?
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Claudia. Did you have another?
I just had one question that I wanted to ask, and that's the status of the IT RFP.
Mhm. Yeah. So
That's the one to me that's the most time sensitive.
there we go.
Okay. Sorry for the delay there, Claudette. The satellite wasn't quite getting the signal. Where we're at with the IT proposal is the team has evaluated all the proposals. They met last week. We've narrowed it down to 4 vendors. We're going to be having them probably come in for an interview process as quickly as we can get them in. Also, Jerry Tolman has offered up some additional information for the group to consider as part, in other words, trying to get ready for the interview process of the 4 firms. So hopefully and I think they're all really great firms. They're all essentially local, meaning Vermont or, Upper Valley type of area. So that not only would we have updated equipment and all that, but the management services would not come from a long distance if we needed, on-site help and all that. That's probably the best update I can give you right now.
Progress is being made.
It sounds like progress.
So,
Good.
hold on.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rob. You had a question?
Well, sorry. Progress is being made. Some of the candidates are sound good. Jerry's added input for questions and clarifications is going to be incorporated into the next round.
Right. So we're talking about an RFP that's primary objective was the server replacement. Server 3 workstations.
And workstations, yeah. And services to maintain.
Okay. Cool. So go ahead, Marcia.
By services, do you mean applications like NIMRIC?
No, I think
No.
Go ahead, Rob. You go.
Well, sorry. It's maintaining the network, maintaining the security, network security, and so on.
Herb is nodding. Go ahead, Marcia.
So I had asked if we could have some, I sent a spreadsheet to Herb and to Roger because I wanted to see what we had for, password security and that sort of thing. And I think that really is something that is important and we need for each application so that we have a process for who's the administrator, who has access, how are the passwords changed, and what's the onboarding and offboarding protocol so that we keep security of these systems.
And Herb noted, he confirmed receipt. I'm like speaking for him because so we can be efficient with all the muting. Confirmed receipt and has understands that Marcia has flagged it as a priority and for her, and then perhaps it could be a future agenda item.
I think Herb has put some protocols in place though. It's not starting from scratch.
Right.
So are you saying there are some or we should have some?
There are some. Yes.
And I will say on a high level, there was a slide in a town meeting presentation, not the most recent one, but the one before that, that sort of addressed what we had done following the BEC scam. So, but yes, that's a little bit different than different spirit of your question. And Herb says he'll get to it. So yeah, yeah. Okay, so we're gonna move on, and Herb has to go. And so I think just to the repairs to fire engine, I just Herb, the designated fund sort of status, has that been part of our packet? That's part of our packet. So we have, that was the real piece. That was the real piece that I wanted Herb to help us with. And so we have he had the benefit of his work for that. Okay, so maybe we'll move on to the repairs to fire engine 1 agenda item then.
Yep, number 8.
Well, it's number 8, reordered. And then Herb has to go because we're over time. It's 9:22 and we agreed to end at 9:10. So
Thanks for letting me go.
no, thank you. Yep. Yes. Okay. And so Herb reminded me that Matt is here to help us with the presentation, and then Sunny, who is a mechanic and perhaps a wizard, is also from what we've heard, who will also provide some help for us as well to answer questions. So Matt, would you like to take it away for us to present on this?
Sure. I mean, mainly I was here to answer any questions in regards to the memo that Alex sent in to you. But essentially, as you know, our plan originally was to refurbish engine 1 once we received our new engine and before we sold engine 2, which would allow us to keep 2 engines in-house. The new engine and engine 2, well, engine 1 was out being refurbished. And the refurbishment would mean refurbishing the engine, refurbishing the pump, and then probably replacing most of the electric lighting to be LED lighting instead of the regular bulb lighting that we currently have on it. So those 3 things would be part of a full engine refurb. And by doing that, we would take a truck, engine 1, which was made in 2005, which is significantly newer, safer, holds more stuff, is more manageable on the types of driveways that we have to get to in the winter in Norwich. It takes this truck, engine 1, and extends its lifetime as a second due piece of apparatus. And since then, our plan has kind of taken a little bit of a turn because engine 1 had some significant damage, significant necessary repairs. There are 2 cylinders in the engine that need to be rebuilt. And that is let me rewind. We had an oil problem. We found out that we had to replace an oil pump. That is a $10,000 cost. And then when they went through the engine, they did compression tests on all the cylinders to figure out why oil was also getting by, and found that 2 of the cylinders there was a lot of blow by. And so the recommendation is we have to rebuild the cylinders. If we're going to do that kind of significant repair to engine 1 to get it road ready again, the suggestion is we should at least consider, doing the other mechanical repairs to engine 1 while it's in the shop, while it's being taken apart to replace the cylinders, and kind of, do that part of what was going to be the refurb in a year, do that now. And then we can do the rest of the refurb, the pump and the electrical stuff when it was planned. So we're coming to you with a request to spend. The challenge here is that when this memo is written, we have a quote for the repair of the cylinders, but not a full quote for the repair for all the stuff that we might do, the mechanical repairs for the refurb. But we know that the repair of the cylinders is going to be, I think it was 19,000 and something. So, and then that the oil pump replacement was going to be 10,000. We do have this money in our designated fund, and like I said, we would have spent somewhere along this line anyways in a year. It's just
Matt,
that because of the breakdown now, it's kind of fast forwarding this part of the refurb.
Or did I freeze?
Oops.
You're frozen.
Yeah, CATV also, their feed.
Uh-oh. Well,
I see.
Uh-oh.
boy, oop.
CATV, I saw movement.
So we're back now. I don't know what happened.
I'm not sure when you.
So you were talking about the designated fund expenditures. You said we do have money in the designated fund, and then the internet disagreed. So
calling my bluff.
Yeah.
So we do have money in the apparatus designated fund to do this, and most of the money would have been we would have been doing this a year from now, anyways. And so we're kind of fast forwarding the mechanical overhaul of engine 1, or the engine mechanical overhaul.
Okay, so do board members understand sort of that there was a need that something happened? There was a need with that created this problem, and that while we are fixing this issue, that we're choosing to do work that is slated from in the draft capital plan slated for a year from now. Is that understood? Okay. Go ahead, Mary. You have a question?
No, I just think this is a necessary repair. It came up and we should take care of it. I don't think there's anything to debate or ask about. It was very clear as far as the materials that were presented in the packet. It will get us a little ahead in a way. It was on schedule. It's just happening a little bit before it was expected. And I think to not do it would be not good. I think that would cause a safety problem in the town. So I'm ready to move it unless someone else has a pressing question.
Let's take some continued discussion. How about that? Go ahead, Marcia.
So money again. When we just voted for the engine number 2, it was my recollection that the designated fund was pretty much used up. And so I'm not sure that we have how much we have left in there, but from the discussion, the estimate is $19,945. Herb had sent me an email in response to a question I asked, and about like, what's the outer edge? Because this was like the best estimate, right? For like, we think it'll be this, but I want to know what's the worst case scenario. But at that time he said, we're losing gallons of oil. And then I just think I heard from Matt that we're only going to do the $19,000 refurbishment and do the 10,000 oil pump later. So how can we put off the oil pump if it's losing gallons of oil right now? Is that?
So let's have Matt clarify that last point, and then before we go. Ahead,
yeah, I may have misspoke. We do have to do both. The 2 repairs that we have to do are replace the engine oil pump and rebuild the cylinders. And then what I didn't, and so $10,000 and 19,000, we'll call it 20. So, a total of $30,000 expenditure that we know about. And the only thing that I was leaving as a question mark, because we haven't had because we don't yet have the estimate, is that we could do some additional mechanical repair work that we would normally do in a year. We could do that now because it's going to be up on the lift, because it's going to be taken apart to do the repairs that we have to do. But unfortunately, we don't have that estimate yet.
So is that Matt, is that something we could ask Sunny, who's with us, for, about what the additional mechanical work may or may not look like in terms of cost? Is that appropriate ask?
Yeah, great.
Actually, there's two repairs going on here.
Mhm.
Is the oil pump, which it came back from Dingy's and it lost oil pressure. And that was caused by an electrical failure in the pump itself. And so the oil pump has been changed. And so in the process of road testing that, they went and did a road test on it. And it says here on my report from Freightliner is that they went 50 miles and went 2 quarts. So that's quite a bit of oil in 50 miles. And so it is 2 different repairs that we're talking about. The oil pump has already been done.
And can you estimate the outer edge of what the other repairs would be? I mean, what could we possibly be looking at for cost, bottom line?
For everything to repair the engine, that means all the cylinders, a new head, cylinder head, turbo, and all of that, that would be, I believe, the 19.9 that you should have gotten that estimate.
So I think, Sunny, I think the additional question is for the amount, for the work that we could do for a typical in-frame engine overhaul, the stuff that we don't have the quote for yet. If you could give us sort of, and these repairs don't have to be made to
Right.
get the truck back on the road. We were just suggesting that we would do these repairs while the truck was on the lift, because we might save some money by not putting it on the lift again. And we're going to do these sort of repairs in a year. If we were to also replace the bearings, replace the rear springs, evaluate the radiator, inspect the driveline, inspect the brakes, what kind of, can you give us, we're trying to get an estimate from Freightliner for this, but can you give us sort of a ballpark for what we might get from that?
That's kind of a hard thing because where it's a specialty vehicle, they don't have a flat rate for those specific things. I'm not sure if they would have to take the radiator out to get it tested. And I don't know where you would get it tested now, because the place that used to do it locally is they sold everything and they're not doing it anymore. So because we just ran into that with another truck that I worked on here last week. So I don't know exactly how much it would be, and I really don't want to say because I really don't know.
Sure.
Fair enough.
Okay, Rob, do you have a question?
Yeah, so when they have this thing up on the lift and they're starting the work on rebuilding the engine and whatever still remains with the oil pump, do they have enough time to be able to look at the bearings and the springs and give us an estimate? Is there, I would think well, maybe not. I would think with the engine out, it'd be easier to pull the radiator for testing. But do you think they would have enough time to give us an estimate on the rest of the work?
I have requested that from them. They just have not got to the rear springs yet. as though the bearings inside the engine, they will be replaced while they're in there, so that we don't have to take that out again. The radiator, that's a difficult thing because either you got to take it out and send it out somewhere. I have to ask them about that.
But it isn't leaking now as far as we know.
The radiator, no.
Yeah, okay.
So
I would just add that putting up a heavy piece of equipment like that on a lift for the other board members is just picking it off the floor of the garage is hundreds of dollars.
So we're having this just to sort of bring us back a little bit before I take more questions. We're having this discussion because the proposed motion for us to take action on is to authorize, a potential motion is to authorize repairs identified by, you know, these repair shops and the associated engine refurbishment recommended by, and to fund such repairs from the designated fund. And so Herb has included in the packet the current status of the designated funds and where it would be after with the appropriations with the new fiscal year. And so, we have the money, right, to sort of use the phrasing that Marcia has used, but we don't necessarily have the total right now for the authorization. So I think that's why we're having this conversation a little bit, right? So just to bring us back a little bit so we don't get lost in the details, we're sort of asked to authorize a broad directive with the knowledge that the money is there for that broad directive, right? Any other questions? Go ahead, Marcia.
So when I'm looking at this dashboard, I see we've got subtotal of designated funds of $259,800. And I know that we've just approved a very expensive fire engine. So the question is, when are we getting that other fire engine? Do we have enough money to buy the fire engine and pay $30,000, maybe more, for the fire engine 1 to be refurbished?
So just to be clear, the current balance in the fire equipment, which that Herb has provided, is $577,621. With FY 2022, there'll be 20,000. There'll be $597,621.16. Right. So that's the number. Those are the numbers that we're working with. Okay.
So when are we paying for fire engine number 2?
So Matt, do you have a sense? Go ahead.
Yep. Yeah. So it actually pushes that even further. I mean, it's a good question. We're not in an ideal world. We're going to receive the new fire engine July of 2022. So that really pushes it out into FY23. So we will have more in the designated. We can certainly cover this, and we'll have enough in the designated fund to cover both the refurb and the purchase, and be marching forward with our capital plan, past FY 2023.
Okay.
Yeah, and mainly, I think that in an ideal world, we would have been able to come to you with the estimate for replacing, the rear springs as well. But right now, what we're asking your approval on is to spend the roughly $30,000 from the apparatus designated fund in order to make the repairs that have to be made, essentially, because the engine doesn't work and the oil pump had to be replaced. When we have the quote on the springs, we'll come back to you, and that is more of a question of, is it better to do it now versus do it later?
Thank you.
Claudette, do you have a comment? And then maybe I'll take a motion after your comment.
I just have, I clearly missed something along the way.
Mm-hmm.
With our new fire engine, you're saying now that's pushed out to 2023? The order the order for the new fire engine that was just placed earlier this month, I believe, or the end of last month.
I think that the way the purchase of the new fire engine, it's a 14-month delivery, spectrum. So if we would get it in 14 months. And so it pushes it out to essentially a July 2022 delivery date if, all the supply chains work correctly in the world. And so that pushes it into, I think, July 2022 would be the beginning, wouldn't it be the beginning of the FY 2022-23 budget?
So our motion and our authorization sort of committed funds, but they have not been expended, right? Yet, right? And that's all.
And once you have the fire engine, correct? Like it has to be built to specification and delivered, and then you pay. I don't know if you pay a deposit.
There's a staggered process in paying, but we're definitely, I can say with all assurance that we have what we need already in the designated fund to cover all the stuff that we're committed to.
Okay, and then my second question is that it's really not a question, it's a comment. The motion does not apparently limit us to the $30,000 for the oil pump and the cylinders or whatever it was. So if I'm going to be supporting this motion, it's going to be limiting it to that $30,000. I don't want an open-ended.
I mean, so what I will say to one clarifying question, and then I'll ask for a motion that board members would like to make, is obviously for standard operating procedures, you want to get this fire engine number 1 up and running. But, is there any world where it's responsible to wait for the full picture before authorizing funds, Matt? What would you say?
I think it would be better to authorize the funds now for the quotes that we have now, and realizing that we might be back at the next select board meeting saying, this is the new quote for the springs, and let's discuss it then. But if you authorize the $30,000 now, we can get the needed repairs, in line and get them done.
So let me take public comment, and then from Cheryl Lindbergh, and then I'll entertain a motion.
Okay. Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road. I'm really wanting to just ask for clarification on the fund. So the one that's in the packet is an equipment fund, but I keep hearing apparatus fund used. Are those being used interchangeably, those words? Or are there two different funds that we were speaking about, Matt or Roger? If I could get clarification on that.
I quoted numbers from what is highlighted as the fund balance fire equipment, but so yes.
But I've heard the word apparatus fund, and I just wanted to clarify what that meant, and if that's the same thing or different.
I can answer that if you want.
Please.
Yeah, you're honing in on something that I saw as well. The dollar figure that is in that fund is for the apparatus designated fund. It looks to be here labeled the fire equipment fund, which is a separate fund.
Yes.
We have two funds, fire apparatus and fire equipment. And the fire apparatus fund has the $577,621 in it, and the fire equipment fund, I believe, has 200 and something thousand dollars in it.
So I am citing correct numbers for the fire apparatus fund, though it is labeled on our in our packet on page 46 as the fire equipment.
Yeah, but so the main thing is the fire apparatus designated fund has the amount that you quoted and will cover the purchases that we need.
Okay, Mary, do you have a comment?
I have a question.
Yep.
It's just when we get to the motion, I think we've decided to frame the motion in the amount, but just wondering whether the motion is crafted in a broader way than we had intended.
Yes, that's what we're talking about. So there was a suggestion by one, I think it was Claudette, that we, and also
Only-
Matt, that we structured the motion to potentially include the knowledge of the repairs that we have quotes for.
Well, okay, I'm just saying that I think the way I heard it is that we wanted to frame the motion so that the amount was $30,000. But if the motion is including the other repairs that we did not want to include, like the $30,000 would be the cylinder repair and the oil pump. The other things like the springs and the radiator are outside that. So the motion says, including those repairs identified by ATG Lebanon and the associated, well, engine refurbishment, yes, but should we strip out the part that says, including those repairs identified? Do they include?
About whatever we want.
Yes,
Well,
that's what we're discussing. So how about this? Is there a motion? Go ahead, Claudette.
I move to authorize the fire department to overhaul engine number one's engine up to $30,000. And such funds to come from the designated fund fire apparatus.
That's nice and simple. I like it. I will second that.
Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Mary. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Marcia.
So I'm imagining this massive fire truck up on a lift, and now we've discovered that there are $10,000 more repairs. It costs money to get it up there. Does it stay there while we get to another meeting? What do we do?
Matt has stated that hopefully by the next meeting, they will come back with an estimate on if additional repairs need to be made. And at that point in time, we can choose to.
And guess what? We're meeting next week. We've already talked in our agenda setting for a special meeting. And so while I'm loath to do it, we could potentially add that then.
So maybe we can keep it off the lift until we have another estimate.
Oh my goodness, we have full circle. So I had asked, just to clarify, I had asked that question for Matt, and his recommendation was that he would like the authorization for the repairs that we have quotes for, given that this is an important engine for fire for standard operating procedures. So.
And that was my motion.
And
Yes.
it was seconded by Mary, and we're in discussion. So I am.
Question, please.
I'm going to call the question.
I'm calling it.
Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Great. Thank you. Unanimous. Okay, so thank you, Matt. We may be hearing from you soon, it sounds like.
Yeah, we'll get you the other quotes as soon as we can. I also wanted to just thank Sonny. I don't know how many of you know him directly, but he is an incredible asset to the town of Norwich. You know, doing the job of both mechanic and other DPW jobs. He has been incredibly helpful for us navigating all of our apparatus repairs, especially significant ones like right now.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sonny.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Good work.
Okay. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to this operational plan for 21-22.
Can
So
we give Sonny permission to be late at work tomorrow? Because he was here tonight.
yeah.
We'll give you a 7:31. How's that? Or 7:01.
I don't think that will happen.
Cool. Okay, so let's move on to this operational plan. So I think, look, we've sort of been discussing sort of the year's business for probably half a year at this point. And so I think we've previously sort of affirmed it. So let's just sort of like put our rubber stamp on it, so to speak. So go ahead, Marcia, do you have any further framing for this?
Yeah, basically, I think I need to, because in various iterations, Article 36, I had improperly put a solar property tax deduction. I just have to replace that with the language on the first page, and then just remove the first 3 bullets on Article 36 on the second page, and then I think it's okay.
Your documents are near your mic.
Oh, sorry, I always do that.
Okay, so the only thing I would say really quickly is that I'm most, I guess, this was a substantial, so like Marcia has made it clear that this was sort of also, as well as sort of a task to sort of move us forward in an operational plan, this was also demonstrating some of her thinking on some other issues. And there's sort of a first half of that memo that sort of talks about sort of funds and what that means. I think I am most interested in affirming sort of the part of the memo that talks about keeping the lights on, childcare, policing reform, Article 36. I think that is really important to affirm and move on with. And I think everything else is important context information for perhaps keeping the lights on, but has to be discussed and something I'm less willing to affirm. If that makes sense.
Makes sense to me.
I
Do you wanna-
affirm.
Go ahead, Claudia.
Pardon?
I was just affirming those 4 priorities or goals for the remainder of the year. But also one question that Marcia left open-ended was, should we, I thought we should prioritize, and keeping the lights on to me was the top priority. And Marcia questioned us, should we prioritize the others in case? And I have no strong feelings on.
Yeah, anyone else have strong feelings on that? Go ahead, Mary.
I just think we should be moving on our capital planning this summer.
Yep. And we're getting, the only thing I would say in terms of timeline, which I guess, or in terms of timeline deliverables, which I guess can inform priorities, is we're getting a mid-report from the childcare committee in July to be discussed in August. We're getting a report from Article 36 task force in August, probably to be discussed in September. Both of these reports are arriving in advance of budget season, right? So there is sort of an implicit understanding that, you know, they'll inform our budget discussions, right? And so that
Budget, yes, but I think there's, I think there's some broad things about capital that we could use a session, a meeting or something to talk about.
Yeah, and I think yeah, I agree. I have no reason to quantify. Yeah, yes, I agree. Okay, Marcia.
So if it's all right with all of you, I will clean this up, and I don't know how you want me to do it. Send it to everybody just to see, and then put it for inclusion for like the next meeting for blessing, or I don't know how you want to do it.
Yeah, I think, go ahead, Claudia, you have a suggestion?
I was going to say, I think it's been blessed. I say just clean it up and send it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would board members, can I actually have I would appreciate a motion that sort of illustrates that effect, just because kind of we're making this to be an important document, and so we should talk about what it is that we're affirming in it. Go ahead, Claudia.
I'll try to wing it. I move that we accept the operational plan for 2021, 2022 with through lines as submitted by Marcia in the June 23rd select board packet, with the amendments that Marcia made, that Marcia stated she would make to the Article 36 task force.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Rob. Any, for discussion, I would say, I guess I would ask for a friendly addendum to have it be more something that something that acknowledges that we're affirming the through line section of the operational plan rather than the operational plan document in its entirety.
Accepted friendly amendment.
Okay. Okay.
And so what we'll do is make the addendum A just more like an FYI.
Yeah.
This may be discussed as we go forward.
Okay, so we,
Does Rob accept that or second that friendly amendment?
Yes, I second that friendly amendment.
okay. So great. So if there's no further discussion, is there further discussion? Go ahead, Mary.
I'm not sure what we are actually voting for.
We're voting to affirm the through line section of the operational plan plan document that was in the packet.
Okay, I just, I cannot accept that we would, for instance, change our accounts to include a highway fund without a particular specific discussion of that. So for that reason, I'm not going to support this motion, just saying.
So what I will say is I had similar concerns, and which is why I asked us to affirm sort of the part where I think we do have more consensus on. And so
Right.
not everything that we're seeing.
I understand that. To me, it doesn't fix it. So that's fine.
Okay. I just wanted to be clear. Okay.
Well, yeah, clear in the unclarity, but okay.
Perhaps okay. Okay. All right. I'm going to call the question then. How is that? Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, let's roll call. Mary, how do you vote?
I vote no.
Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Marcia, how do you vote?
Yes.
Claudette, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay, great. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is so just to be clear, the next is an executive session. The agenda item got split into two parts, just sort of acknowledge that the first part of the it involved our town manager who had to leave. So I think all folks, because I'm recording here on my screen, I think all folks in the room with me, Miranda and Richard for CATV can sort of head out, and I'll continue to record like I normally do. Okay, so that's the context on that, and I'll record the times. So let's now we're gonna make motions.
Okay, so just to be clear, Roger,
Yes.
there are two motions that need to be made to establish context and then one motion to enter. Is that how this works?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to have that motion, the first one?
Please.
Okay. I move to find that premature general public knowledge of attorney-client communications between the select board and town attorney as to matters for which legal advice is sought would clearly place the town at a substantial disadvantage by disclosing privileged communications and waiving attorney-client privilege.
Is there a second? Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. Any discussion? Okay, let's vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mary.
And the second one.
Mhm.
I move to find that premature general public knowledge of the select board's discussion of an agreement with a town employee would clearly place the town at a substantial disadvantage because of the potential for disclosing the select board's internal exchange of ideas as to what the agreement may allow or require.
Is there a second? Okay, made by Mary and then Marcia. Any discussion? All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you.
I move to enter executive session for the purposes of considering attorney-client advice that has been shared with the chair and for discussion of an employment agreement with a town employee.
Is there a second? Okay. I'm gonna say made by Marcia the second. And then, so all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna pause the recording and put folks in the waiting room. Okay, is there a motion to enter public session?
So move.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded, okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. Any discussion? Any discussion? No? All in favor? Okay, great. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
With the vote.
Do we want to discuss? All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, great. Thank you, 11:01. All right, thank you all for all of your patience with these technical stuff, and have a good night.
Roger, I think it went surprisingly well for a hybrid meeting.
Yeah, okay. That's
Yeah.
stuff to
Good job.
improve.
Congratulations.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Worked great, 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 great.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.